Good morning, and thank you for joining the California's ISO Media Briefing. Elliot Mainzer, ISO's President and CEO, will be providing an update on grid conditions with support from Mark Rothletter, who is ISO's Senior Vice President and Chief Operating Officer. This call is being recorded, and the video file will be posted on the news page on ISO's website shortly after the event. There will be an opportunity for members of the media to ask questions after the update. We will provide instructions for how to raise your hand at that time. After your line is open, please start by introducing yourself by name and affiliation. Please try and be brief so that Mr. Mainzer and Mr. Rothletter have time to address as many questions as they can within the time allotted for this call. With that, I will now turn the meeting over to Elliot Mainzer.
Thank you, and hello everyone. I really appreciate you all joining us again today. I thought it would just make sense another time just to get together and provide an update, a little bit of a look back, and also a chance to take some questions from you as we look like we're in the final stages of this extraordinary event, certainly in terms of the heat storm. Of course, we're now going to be moving into a different set of conditions that will be in many ways very challenging for other entities across the state. We'll turn to that. Certainly last evening, I think the electric grid finally started to get some relief yesterday as the most extreme weather has slowly begun to change, and now we're seeing significant escalation of wildfires and certainly what I think is now currently a tropical storm K, bringing a whole new set of challenges. Last evening, our peak load topped out at 48,613 megawatts. It ended up being about 3,000 megawatts less than what we had forecast. That was certainly welcome news on one degree, but we saw from the clouds and from the solar and from the smoke that it had a fairly significant impact on our solar generation last night, which was one of the risk variables and something that we're going to be dealing with today. So certainly the lower loads was welcome news, but we're now watching closely what the impacts of the smoke and hurricane and tropical storm K will be with its rain, strong winds and clouds that are coming into Southern California today. So our load forecast for today is forecasted to be about 46,700 megawatts. But its potential today with the storms, the clouds, and the smoke that we could lose as much as 40 to 60% of our solar capability compared to Wednesday due to the rain, clouds, and smoke. So this is a significant risk variable. Of course, we could also be facing some transmission challenges, and the utilities in Southern California in particular are considering triggering public safety power shutoffs for some of their service territories as a way to minimize the risk of utility equipment igniting a fire in these high wind conditions. I think this week, for everyone who's been following this story understands that there really are two sort of very different types of grid pressures that we've been facing in California. Those last several days driven by the heat was a situation where the maximum demand on the system came close to exhausting all available supply and demand side resources. The public service power shutoffs are a situation where the utilities preemptively de-energize their lines because there's a concern that the wind and the very, very flammable conditions might cause a fire from their electrical equipment. So they're two very distinct things. And we move today, if we get through today successfully, we then move into a situation where we could have some PSPS events and potentially even simultaneously with today. Along with the PSPS, we were also facing the potential of floods, mudslides, and other challenges as the weather transitions really from one extreme to the other. So our colleagues down in Southern California today have their work cut out for them as we go from one extreme weather condition to the next. On the grid today, we have another flex alert that has been called for 4 to 9 p.m. Again, that customer conservation can help reduce demand and give us a little bit of additional margin for error given these other risks that are at play on the system. And everyone continues to need to be vigilant in their efforts today as we monitor changing conditions and what steps are necessary to get through them. I will point out that this evening, again, from 4 to 9, we are fully we are asking our utility partners and others to be fully prepared to make available their emergency demand response and backup generation unit capabilities as well if the grid ends up in an EEA2 stage, which is that third stage of the EEA system. So I want to just emphasize again that we are not finished with this event. It's another day of heightened focus on the grid. Thanks in advance to consumers for working one last day here with us to try to conserve as much energy as they possibly can between 4 to 9 p.m. and to help us get through one more very, very intense night on the grid, with a successful reliability outcome. I also just, as I did yesterday, I want to just take a couple of minutes. It has been the level of communication and coordination and just the full-scale mobilization across California has been critical to our success this week in being able to avoid the need for rotating outages. As you recall, back on Tuesday evening, when we achieved our record-setting demand of 52,061 megawatts, at that particular in our service territory, we directed them to arm their firm load. And by directing them to arm their firm load, we were indicating that we were asking them to prepare for the possibility of having to shed load. That first step in the EEA3 is only arming of firm load. It's the preparation for that potential. And if over the course of the next period of time, our operating reserve capability was going to further deteriorate, then we would issue a subsequent directive in which we would actually require them to shed that load. We did not get to that step on Tuesday night. And I think many of you have seen when Governor Newsom triggered the use of the wireless emergency alert system, we saw over 2,000 megawatts of reduction in customer demand over the course of about a half an hour or so. That allowed us to restore our operating reserves, move us back from the edge, and prevented us from having to declare a load at an event. So we stayed in the phase of EEA3 and fortunately did not have to large-scale rotating outages. So that was a remarkable. Grateful to all the Californians that responded to all of the other entities. I want to just list off a few of the folks really that I believe really wanted to call out for appreciation. So, the utilities in California were absolutely amazing. I also want to call out, there have been many people working out in the heat on the actual energy infrastructure itself, the distribution lines, the substations. That equipment has been very stressed, and their work has also played in maintaining the reliability of that distribution level infrastructure has played a very, very important role. The level of collaboration coordination across the state agencies, starting with Governor Newsom and his senior staff, has been remarkable. They've brought together all of the major state agencies that work on energy, the California Energy Commission, the California Public Utilities Commission, the communications groups, and there's just been remarkable coordination across the board on that side. The Office of Emergency Services and CAL FIRE and the many other agencies that report up through Director Ghilarducci have just been absolutely incredible. I just so much appreciation for the work of all those people out there fighting fires. It really is heartbreaking to see the state now moving into another wave of very serious wildfires, and the work that OES and CAL FIRE and the also firefighting agencies are doing is really, really important, and they're going to be focused on that in the next several days. And finally, again, to our energy colleagues at the CPUC, the California Energy Commission, the California Resources Agency, the California Department of Water Resources, Caltrans for promoting our Flex Alerts on its highway signs, the California Government Operations Agency, the Department of Health and Human Services, the Department of Labor. Almost every single aspect of state government has participated in this enormous effort and made a real difference for the grid and for the health and welfare of California residents as we've moved through this extreme event. It also want to really make sure that there were many businesses in California, industrial organizations, commercial organizations, water users who made real differences in their demand for power to help us work through these conditions. And I want to thank you all in the media for the work that you've done to help elevate our messages and make sure they get out to consumers and others to understand the significance of this event. This was an extraordinary period of time for California and our grid and the people of the state. And I also wanted to acknowledge the staff of California ISO, all in our control. This last 10 days have worked under incredible stress to maintain, and all of our employees from the area have contributed in one way or another. Obviously, extremely appreciative and proud of their efforts. So I think we are hopefully with today, we need to stay very focused this one more day with these high loads and these uncertainty variables on our grid. But hopefully by tomorrow, we'll start seeing a change, a significant reduction in loads. But as always, we're going to have to remain vigilant here on the grid. The fire risk, the smoke, the uncertainties around the storm, these are all variables that the California ISO and our partners, the state and the utilities, and we will remain vigilant and committed to do everything we can to maintain reliability. So thank you all again for being with us, Mark, this morning, and happy to take any questions that you might have.
As we move to the Q&A portion of today's call, you may enter the question queue by using the WebEx hand icon on your phone. You will hear a notification when you are unmuted. Your line is open. Please start by introducing yourself by name and affiliation. Please try and be brief so that Mr. Mainzer and Mr. Rothletter as many questions as they can within the time allotted for this call.
So let's go ahead and take Paul Rogers.
Your line is now unmuted.
Two quick questions.
And Paul, if you can introduce yourself, please, your affiliation. Thank you.
You mentioned the smoke. Can you talk about the mosquito fire in particular, how many megawatts it could cost from solar, and really, how many solar farms are in that area where the smoke is bad, sort of in the northern Sierra, or are you mainly talking about Southern California fires? And then the second one is, during the last couple of days, particularly Tuesday night, more than 100,000 customers in and around San Jose and other Bay Area cities lost power due to equipment failure, PG&E failure, which also cut power to several hospitals and retirement communities when temperatures were above 100 degrees. And I'm just wondering what your view is of that, if that's acceptable given these temperatures, or if you have any other thoughts. Thank you.
Mark, with respect to the mosquito fire and the energy infrastructure in this area, do you want to speak to any of that, or maybe just sort of the aggregate impacts on the solar fleet that we've been seeing from the smoke, which I think is extending through a pretty good reach of California?
Yeah. So the smoke, I'll have to say I combine up the smoke and cloud cover impact together. I really don't have a differentiation of how much it is smoke caused, but we're seeing about a 30% reduction yesterday in solar production relative to what we saw at kind of the higher levels on Wednesday. And so the smoke, between the smoke and cloud cover today, we're seeing potentially a 40 to 60% reduction. Again, I don't have a breakout of how much of that is smoke caused and how much of it is cloud cover caused.
And how many megawatts is that, Mark? How many megawatts is that about in terms of loss? It would be how many?
say 1,000 potentially.
Got it.
Paul, on your other question, I'm just gonna have I have to refer you to the PG&E folks for that question. I can't speak honestly. I've been so focused on the bulk grid. I can't speak to the specifics of their distribution level impacts and how they handle that. So hopefully you can reach out to that team and they can give you a better answer to what was going on at that point. Our focus at that stage was just to do everything we possibly could to mitigate the need for broader rotating outages on the system.
Thanks. Yeah, I think the frustration there is a lot of people saw in the media that the grid survived, and they were bombarding Northern California newspaper, TV, radio stations saying, my 90-year-old grandfather had a 9-hour outage on Tuesday night in his retirement community. What are you talking about? They don't understand the difference.
Yeah, no, I understand the point you're making, and I have sympathy for that. And we certainly acknowledge, these last few days were very, very just an unprecedented level of heat, stressing infrastructure, both physical and human infrastructure across the board. So I understand the point, and I think the PG&E guys can speak more to what happened within their system.
All right, moving on to the next caller. Jason, your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
I'm sorry, who was that for?
I think you're up, Jason.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Hi, Jason Fordney with California Energy Markets. Yes, Elliot, earlier this week, when you were simply dealing with the heat and not all these other factors, I wanted to take a little bigger picture. There was almost a celebratory mood that we came out of this without outages, almost a declaration of victory. However, this situation has really opened up California to a lot of criticism from the usual critics of renewable policies. And also, it appears that reliability is increasingly becoming the responsibility of the consumer. And that could be said to be a good thing, people learning more about conservation and tuning in, but there's a lot of people that are not tech savvy, are not tuned into these flex alerts and whatnot. So what would you say in response? I know this is not CAISO's fault, the policies perhaps that have led to this, but what would you say to someone saying, you're being a little bit too celebratory, a little bit too backslapping on this, considering how close we came to a very dangerous situation that can be life or death for residents?
Well, what I would say, Jason, is, certainly from our perch here at the ISO, I think California, as much as any other place in the world, as we saw here these last 10 days, is being impacted by the effects of a changing climate as much as anyone. I mean, this heat storm, the pressure on demand was as you know, was unprecedented. And I think the state, by policy, is just, extremely committed to trying to do everything it can to basically decarbonize its power system and to bring on just enormous amounts of clean energy resources. And we're kind of in still the relatively early stages of this transition. And it just as the state is sort of turning the corner towards really bringing on enormous amounts of additional clean energy resources, the volatility and the uncertainty of heat and temperatures and drought are hitting with full force. And so these things are coming together. And as you saw, we had a 52,000 megawatt load night, well outside of the planning standard for the state. And it took every last consumer we could get help from to be able to work through that without rotating outages. I do think, if you look forward the next several years, or actually if you just look backward, and we've talked about this before, just since July of 2020, California has brought on 8,000 megawatts of new clean energy resources, including 3,500 megawatts of 4-hour batteries. And I know, Jason, you probably saw how how well those battery resources performed here this last week. And certainly as we bring on several thousand megawatts of additional energy storage resources here in the next year or two, they're going to provide an additional level of buffer into the net peak. I think earlier this year, the California Public Utilities Commission issued its single largest order for new clean energy resources in its history. And I think at over 11,500 megawatts. We expect to see more of that here in the not too distant future. I would say the other thing is that certainly, I think something that has been increasingly acknowledged in California over the last year in particular, and manifests itself this last week, is when you get into these extreme grid conditions, not only do you don't want to have to be making sort of public pleas for conservation as much as really sophisticated, automated demand response programs woven in part of the customer, in which they're not being asked to behave in real time, but whereas you're able to have hundreds of thousands of people participating in these programs being compensated through their rate design, very modest and almost unnoticeable changes in their and air conditioning behavior in a way that is even greater demand response without disruption or the sort of kind of public plea element. So look, this was an extreme event, and again, I could not be more grateful for the kind of response we got from our partners and from California consumers, right? You saw when especially on Tuesday when the WEA went out, folks really responded at that point. But over the next few years, the combination of new resources, dispatchable capacity, the emergency reserve that's been put in place for California, and I think much more sophisticated and automated demand response programs, it should allow us to be able to work through events like these with less disruption. But we also have to get a handle on just what the future looks like. We've said before, the past is really not a predictor of the future as much. We've obviously entered kind of a new normal in terms of temperature and weather volatility, and we have to get a handle on that and bring that into our resource adequacy planning. So, again, very appreciative, very, relieved. Look, outages of any type are highly disruptive, and that's why we all work so hard to avoid as many of them as we possibly could. But I believe that the state is very focused, very committed, and an event like this is not an indication of the need to retreat from a goal of clean energy, but actually leaning in and working even harder to get ahead of the issues.
All right, moving on to the next caller. Kate, your line is now unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hello, thank you. This is Kate Winston from S&P Global Commodity Insights. Mark talked about this a little bit already, but I wanted to ask about the performance of renewables yesterday. You extended the length of the Flex Alert to account for uncertainty about wind and solar. I'm wondering, how did they actually perform compared to usual, and does the uncertainty about their performance, like yesterday, give you any pause about the state's plan to double down on clean energy?
I'll take an initial shot, and if Mark wants to add. As we mentioned, yesterday we saw a reduction of about a third, from about 12,000 to 8,000 megawatts of solar generation from the smoke and the cloud cover. And what I would say is, I think that wind energy and solar energy have been growing on grids across the United States, across the world, very rapidly over the last decade. And I think system operators and system operators and resource planners understand that these are variable resources, right? They are a function of natural forces, and they have an inherent variability and uncertainty. And in order to be able to accommodate very, very large amounts of them and be able to have a reliable and affordable and resilient electricity system, you have to have other resources to complement them. You need a full portfolio. Right now, the big push over the next several years, particularly here in California, given the way that our system works with big solar ramp off in the evening, where our primary strategy for the next several years is a big focus on energy storage. And as you saw, as you certainly the last few nights, if you looked, were able to observe on our website, those batteries came into production almost perfectly timed to help supplement the system as the sun was ramping out. We had imports from adjacent states, and we had the supplemental energy from inside California. And one or two nights, we also had a very nice complementary wind ramp. There were a couple nights where you really saw natural portfolio effects between our wind and solar. So looking out, the key thing is wind and solar are very, very valuable clean energy resources, but you need to complement them both with other sources of dispatchable capacity, other sources of clean, more baseload dispatchable generation like geothermal resources, and you really do need to have that flexible demand. And you have to have that flexible demand really institutionalized into the heart of operations so that it can become a truly viable and reliable resource. So I feel as though, there are going to be challenges. This is not easy. But it's I know California, from the governor right to the state agencies, right through all of our utilities, everyone is absolutely committed, and we're bringing, tapping into the existing expertise of all the people in the industry and bringing lots of, new people into our industry who are rolling up their sleeves and helping figure it out. So, this is very challenging, but it's very important, and certainly we need to continue to do what we can to keep the heat trapping gases out of the atmosphere. So that we don't see even more severe effects of what we saw this week. Mark, anything you'd want to add anything else from an operational perspective to that?
Well, I was just going to say that this is not unknown. It was plan we knew, and the strategy is that you have to change your planning and operational paradigm and practices as a result of the change in type of resources and the variability. And part of that strategy is you look for a diverse set of resources and both geographical and technological diversity to kind of complement each other and smooth some of those things out. So the uncertainty is not unexpected. You just have to plan for it, and you have to operate in a way that is cognizant of that in your forecasting. That's why we have increased our forecasting resources to do better forecasting in terms of the wind, solar, and load variability.
Okay. And how long do you think the heightened risk from the wind and fire and smoke will last?
The wind is not expected in the very short term to persist that long. My understanding is that the storm Storm K is going to have some very, very acute impacts over the next 24 hours, and then at least what we heard from the meteorological briefing this morning. But those conditions can change rapidly, and we know we're moving into the heart of fire season. And so, as we get into the fall, it's very, very dry. This is a condition that can persist for a while. Obviously, as we move further and further into the fall and aggregate temperatures get cooler, it takes some pressure off the system and helps us manage some of the transmission and supply risk. But every day is another day, a new day where you come to the table and focused on managing risk and managing reliability. So certainly we've moved out of one set of circumstances here with this heat storm. We now have to move into a next set of conditions, watching the impacts of fire and wind.
All right, moving on to the next caller in queue. Caller, your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, it's Dale Kassler with the Sacramento Bee. Good morning. Two questions, if you don't mind. One is I'm trying to reconcile this relatively modest peak forecast for demand with the fact that it is still going to be 108 degrees today here. And the second question is going back to your comment a few minutes ago, Elliot, about we need a more automated demand response system so people don't have to just wait on a text alert to remind them. But and you say you want that to be less disruptive. Well, if you have some sort of an automated program that's curbing my electricity use, how is that not disruptive? Do you see what I mean? I'm trying to.
Dale, Yeah, no, it's a fair point. And so, Dale, I'll give you a brief response. I mean, first of all, as we've discussed this last several days, right? Each, Californians, Americans have a variety of different devices that impact electricity consumption. The air conditioner is one that's particularly impactful on very hot nights, right? But you've got, stoves and other appliances, dishwashers, washers and dryers, other things that are increasingly programmable and that where you have the option to move that supply out. And increasingly, we've developed, and in many places already starting to deploy technology to electronically adjust the timing and use of those devices, including thermostats, if aggregated over large numbers of people that represent a significant amount of demand, can have relatively modest adjustments. Say, for example, on your thermostat, just a few degrees up for a relatively brief period of time, that if cycled through enough users, can have very limited impacts on individual users, but provide significant aggregate impacts to the grid. And I know even we've talked about, California is moving very significantly towards the greater use of electric vehicles. Okay? But increasingly, you're going to see that, we recognize that people are going to need to charge their electric vehicles, but you're going to be able to, both on an automated basis, be able to come in and get home, plug your car plug your car in, and you're going to have computer circuitry that will be literally able to look at the conditions on the grid and shift that charging away from the net peak into later in the evening, later in the night. You wake up with a charged vehicle. So there is flexibility and there is automation that, if done at scale, can, I think, really minimize impacts on individual consumers, and also can be done in a way that can be accompanied with actual rate savings. Over the course of the last few weeks in particular, there have been, many people signing up for new programs that have been established by the utilities and in cooperation with the California Commission, California Public Utilities Commission, through our emergency load reduction program, where folks are actually getting compensated. And folks should, if you do to the reliability of the grid and reduce your consumption, that's valuable. Rate line signals line up to make it valuable for drivers. I think that's the future. I think California is already embarking on that increasingly. I think this event will just be further, double down on those efforts.
Sorry, there was a question on the. Well, I think there was a first question about reconciling the 108 kind of in the local Sacramento area and the lower forecast. I think the answer is that the statewide forecast is a statewide forecast, and while it has elements from kind of your local conditions, it's the aggregate result of what are the conditions across the state. And in Southern California, with the large amount of load there, some of the cooling effects of cloud cover and rain in the area do have the effect of reducing the overall demand. And that can change, certainly, if the cloud cover wasn't there and we were still seeing high temperatures in Southern California, you would see obviously higher loads. But the cooling effects of the rain and the cloud cover are driving that lower forecast.
Thanks, Mark.
All right. Moving on to the next caller. Caller, your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Yes, hello. This is David Baker with Bloomberg. I wanted to ask something about that cloud cover and rain. Might we actually get a bit of a benefit out of that storm in terms of higher wind speeds for the wind farms in that area?
You might, and it becomes very could be localized. Is it at the wind farms themselves? As long as the wind is not too high and you end up having high wind cutouts, that's good. If it stays in the range of that production of wind is ideal, that's good. But there are a lot of variables, especially when you start to see from low wind to high wind events.
But you're not forecasting any particular impact on wind from the storm at this point?
We're predicting patterns of wind similar to previous days. There may be intraday patterns that increase the wind production as a result of the wind itself.
Got it. Thanks.
All right, moving on to the next caller in queue. Caller, your line is now unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, all of my questions have been already asked. Thank you.
All right, at this time, we have no further callers in queue.
All right. Well, folks, again, thank you for the questions. Appreciate the interest both in the next 12 hours and in the years ahead. I think I'll just leave you with from our perspective here at the grid, we just deeply appreciative both of the coordination and the communication that's been happening through this event from the governor's office right through all the agencies and our partners at the CPC and the California Energy Commission, all the users, all the businesses, all the residential customers who've contributed. Also, as we've noted, the significant increase in clean energy generation and dispatchable battery capacity that's been added to the grid in recent years, along with the strategic reserve resources that have been made available to us under emergency conditions. All of these things have helped us work through this extraordinarily challenging week. And as we turn our attention to getting through this final challenging day, I think all of us are certainly going to be redoubling our efforts to bring that next big generation of resources online, to accommodate them efficiently, to accommodate them as cost effectively as possible for electricity consumers. And I also wanted to thank the many utilities outside of California and those entities who participate in our energy imbalance market, who've worked with us across the western United States this week to maintain reliability for the broader Western interconnection. Those partnerships with our partners outside of California have also been extremely valuable to us, and really I think also emphasize the importance of leveraging diversity and taking advantage of transmission connectivity across the broader West. It's been another key part of our success, and thank you to all those partners. So hoping that this may be the last time we have to gather for a briefing like this for some period of time, but we will be watching conditions, and thank you again for your interest and for your support in helping us get the message out, and also just helping to really understand these issues and being able to characterize them in a way that the broader public can understand what we're trying to accomplish. So all the best to you. Please stay safe and be well. Thanks again.